world? Thanks for jumping in for another ride. Today we're going to be doing a rear differential fluid change on the 2018 Ford Sport, and as you can see, it is already up on the lift, so let's get started. Alright, so a couple of things that you're definitely going to need, and a couple of things maybe optional here, so let's go ahead and just start working our way across the table. Some protective gloves may be a good idea. A can of cleaners, just some simple cheap brake clean, something like that to clean up the fill plug. And go ahead and get yourself some thread sealant. This is the one that I prefer. It is a Loctite stick, and so you can see this stuff doesn't drip or mess, anything like that. But really honestly, just any sort of good thread sealer will work just fine. This is just the one that I prefer that I keep in the toolbox. So some thread sealer. And the next thing that you are definitely going to need is a 3/8 ratchet. So just something with a thin head or a housing, if you will, may be preferable because there is a cross member that runs behind that differential housing. If you only have one in the toolbox, you can make it work. You can kind of figure it out, but just kind of food for thought is that thick part right there may get in your way a little bit. Next up is fluid, and so I'm just going to be using the Royal Purple Max Gear 7590, and their online resource calls for 1.2 quarts. And so we'll go over that here in just a moment. Next up is you're going to need a way to get the fluid out because there is actually no drain plug on that differential housing. So you can use a hand pump, you can use anything like that that you may have handy, anything that's inexpensive. So it is going to take some effort if you use a hand pump because, well, the differential fluid is really thick. For me, I am going to be using this, and this is basically a vacuum system that I normally use for brakes. And so over time, I have learned that utilizing this before is that I can just connect my hose to the canister, and I can take the part that goes on the brake bleeder nipple. I can actually take this small hose and fit it inside, and it works perfect. And just to go ahead and give you an idea really quick so you can go ahead and get prepared with your supplies is I'm going to show you this. So this hose is just about 3/16, maybe just over 3/16, something like that. And this hose is something that I've kept in the toolbox for applications like this because, like I said, it has worked out several times in the past. So that is going to be the means that I use to go ahead and extract the old fluid out of the differential housing. And if you are going to use something like this vacuum canister, you are going to need a compressed air source, and these things can burn through a lot of air. So make sure that you have a good air supply, or if this is going to take absolutely forever doing it this way, you may as well just go ahead and pump it by hand. But with that, just make sure that you got a good air supply if you're going to use something like that. Next up, just keep it simple. We're going to need something to wipe up any messes, spills, drips, anything like that. So just some cheap paper towels is all I'm going to keep handy. And last but not least, you're going to need a way to transfer your fluid into the rear differential. And so a lot of times you can just buy the soft packs that you can just squeeze and get into the differential. I absolutely love that the industry's come along with that. But for me, I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm just going to use what I already have. And so this is the Motive Products Power Fill, and as you can see, I already have a little bit of the Royal Purple Max Gear in it. So I'm going to go ahead and just put some more in this and pump it up and let this do the work for me. So this is what I'm going to be using to transfer our fluid. And just so you know, we are not affiliated in any way with the Royal Purple brand products. So I've just had really good luck over the years with the Max Gear and the Synchro Max for transmissions. So that's what I'm going to stick with here. And I actually had one that was already partially empty on the shelf, so I just went ahead and grabbed another one for the 1.2 quarts. But let's jump online really quick and check out what Royal Purple says about this product, and it'll give you some good information, and it's absolutely free information, so I'll share that with you real quick.
To utilize this free resource, we're just going to jump online and go to royalpurple.lubricantadvisor.com, and I will put a link down in the description below. And as you can see, the recommendation for this is just the Max Gear 75W90 Max Gear rear differential fluid. And if you go over to the side over here, you can download the data sheet for that. But that is what we're going to be using for this, and the capacity is 1.2 US quarts.
All right, so to get us started, we are going to need to remove this fill plug. And once we get so far back, just go ahead and slip your ratchet out so that you have plenty of room, because if you go all the way out with that plug, you may not have enough room to get that ratchet out, and that's kind of what I was referring to with that center head or housing for your ratchet. So once we're out, we can just go ahead and pull this out by hand, like so. And there is our plug, and you can see that we do have a little sediment there on the end of it.
And here is my little setup. So I have my air compressor, my air hose runs over to my vacula hose runs up, and there is a little 3/16 hose. The 3/16 hose is run up to the fill plug on the rear side of the rear differential of the 2018 Ford Edge Sport. Now there is a fill plug on the front driver's side of that rear differential, but I'm not going to pull that plug. I'm just going to use my hose to get as much fluid out of this as I can, and then just go ahead and do the refill. But I just want you to be aware of that this may not get every drop of fluid out. We're just going to get as much as we possibly can and go from there.
And while that little noisy air compressor was running, I did go ahead and clean up our fill plug, and I'll show you. It just had that sediment that I showed you earlier on there. So I just used a little bit of the cheap brake parts cleaner, got it all cleaned up, cheap white paper towels, everything's wiped down. So I'm going to go ahead and use the thread sealant. And again, this is the Loctite stick, but just use basically any sort of good thread sealer that is readily available to you and affordable. So I'm just going to put about, I guess that's about 5 or 6 areas on there. If you're using a paste, probably just make a quick circle around it. So that is how the stick goes on. Okay, so that is the total amount of fluid that we got out into our canister here. So probably just around a quart, maybe just right under a quart, something like that. Again, I think there's going to be some fluid left up in there, but not a big deal. We're going to change this fairly often. So you can see that it is a little dark. I don't think the lights in here really do it any justice. Not a ton of sediment down the bottom. You can see a little bit there. Nothing just too over the top. It doesn't smell too bad. So that is a plus, especially for differential fluid. So that is the overall condition and the amount that we got out at 45,000 miles. And I just want you to be aware with that little 3/16 hose, maybe just right over 3/16, something like that. This did take about a half hour or so, maybe just over. I didn't set a timer or anything, but I think it was right around a half hour to get all the fluid that we could get out with that small hose. And again, I just used that compressor right over there. So I just basically let it run and kept doing some other stuff around the shop and up in the office and things like that. It shouldn't take that long with a hand pump because you're probably going to be a little more efficient as far as that goes. But again, I just let the compressor run, let it do all the work. So it probably took around a half hour just over. Just want that to be transparent. So make sure you make plenty of time for that. And now let's get back to topping this thing off with the Royal Purple. Now while the vac was pulling out the old differential fluid, I went ahead and got our power fill fluid transfer pump ready to go. And so you can see that we have our Royal Purple down in there. And I did go ahead and just use a compressor to go ahead and top it off with air. And so you can see our gauges up right there. So we'll go ahead and get this fluid going into the rear differential unit. So one thing to note here, if you're not using a flexible hose, I believe this goes in, you can see that this doesn't go very far up inside there. So I'm just going to hang it right there. There's our air supply. And let's crack this thing open and see how it does. So hopefully we don't have a giant mess going. I'm going to make sure that I roll our workstation out of the way. And you can see the gauge is going down a little there. And it takes quite a bit of air pressure to move that differential fluid because it is so thick. So let me go ahead and make sure this thing is topped off. I may have to give it a couple of pumps over there on the hand pump just to make sure we keep fluid moving, but I will be right back. My goal here is I want to get the plug bottomed out as far as I can by hand. So again, we can get our ratchet up in there. So let me grab our ratchet. So this is a pipe plug. So that means it's basically tapered. So there is no reason to really crank down on this thing. Again, just a really basic 3/8 drive ratchet is all the torque you need on this. So I know Ford's probably got a torque spec for it. We're not going to get over the top, and that is plenty tight. You can see our sealant kind of squeezing out right there. The good thing about that Loctite stick is it's the right consistency. We can wipe it up and we don't have dirt and debris sticking to it. That is one of the reasons why I really like that Loctite stuff. So there we go. Our plug's back in. And that completes the rear differential fluid change on the 2018 Ford Edge Sport. So if you're interested in any of the tools or products used in this video, I'll put affiliate links down in the description below. I really appreciate you using those links if you need anything. Also, if you haven't already, please do me a huge favor. Go ahead and hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and as always, jump in for another ride.